Is this working okay? Ooh, okay. So I'm a former student of Scott's from a long, long time ago. I had him for one class. I think it was my sophomore year, many years ago, and it was a J-term class, which, as Shirley and I were talking about it, was a format so valued and beloved that nearly everyone rejoiced when it was terminated. It was 4 weeks, more or less, in the morning, half a dozen Ibsen plays, as I recall. If you had asked me at this same late stage, April of my senior year, where that class ranked in importance in terms of my undergraduate education, I would have said that I loved it, but it probably was not that important. It wasn't in my major, it wasn't in anybody's major. And I wondered on the importance, how could it be? How could it be important? By most standards of accounting, it was barely a blip on the registrar's radar. It was a scant percentage of credits. It was a pass-fail grade. It was not even close to being, like I said, a major. And the fact that I loved it seemed to betray any expectation of real usefulness. I once came to class, just a few seconds to spare, and Scott looked at me and said, Mr. Pelfrey, you woke up just in time. And I said, I actually haven't gone to bed yet. In fact, I haven't even gone back to my room yet. I was just coming back from an all-night pinochle game at St. Ben's, and I said, the only stipulation I have is somebody has to drive me back to class, because I am not missing this class. As I recall, we did the Doll's House that day, and I was not going to miss that discussion. As the years passed and my career progressed, often like an Ibsen play, the stories and themes of Ibsen seemed to become more and more prevalent in my mind. The dangers of ideals, the value of certain vital lies, the way people seem to trap themselves in untenable situations. I put the copy of The Wild Duck on my mantle at home, where I could see it every day. It was a reminder to me about the real world, full of paradoxes and contradictions and difficult choices, not the simplified models that we often learn to aid our understanding of difficult concepts. Over the years, I found myself wondering how I could have so misjudged the usefulness of that class, and others too, like my supposedly more useful and much more expensive MBA, which I say stands for must have been an accident. I decided that we simply account for things poorly. If there were an SEC for life accounting, we'd all be in jail. Many of us for failure to disclose sources of inspiration and value, all of us for misleading statements. Like Einstein said, not everything that counts can be counted. Or I think he said that. The idea behind this series, Grand Illuminations, which I may now consider renaming O Rock or O Scott, came from that class, which touched on so many of the thorny issues, the accursed questions, and from the experience afterwards. I began to wonder how we could recreate a similar result. I was sad when we terminated J-term, and I thought, could we create a J-term-like experience, but over 4 years of talks instead of 4 weeks of class? What if we discuss things that don't really fit neatly into a major, or even a 4-credit class? What if the things that seem superfluous and not terribly useful are actually the opposite? What if it were extremely difficult to measure the success of such a thing? What if it was impossible to measure? What if we acted as if those things were true and we did it anyway? And that's when I found Tony, and we did. Abe Flexner wrote a Harper's article in 1939 titled "The Usefulness of Useless Knowledge." He wrote that our conception of what is useful may have become too narrow to be adequate to the roaming and capricious possibilities of the human spirit. He added, the things which had ultimately proved to be beneficial to mankind and had been made by men and women who were driven not by their desire to be useful, but merely the desire to satisfy their curiosity. When I read that the first time, I sent it to Scott immediately, because I thought of Scott immediately. His legacy has all the markings of what Abe was pointing to, his deep curiosity and passion for literature and the messiness and complexity and contradictions of human life that just are all about literature. That curiosity is what allowed those plays to take root in me. so many years ago, and where they became like scaffolding, useful, critical actually for building a life. And it wasn't just my experience. His impact over the years has been profound. I met another couple students just on the way in here from many years ago. We didn't show up in class after not sleeping for Ibsen. We showed up for Scott's curiosity about Ibsen and for his curiosity about what we thought about Ibsen. And I'm here today for the same reason. And one of my favorite Isaiah Berlin essays, The Pursuit of the Ideal, he quotes a line from Kant. Out of the crooked timber of humanity, no straight thing was ever made. And I'll add to that something Scott might say. No straight thing was ever said either. Please, O Scott, tell us more in plain words.
No. Well, thank you much, Tony, and thank you very much, Bill, for that walk down memory lane. And thank you all for coming. I'm overwhelmed by your attendance. Now, I've never been very good at picking up on hints. If you want me to go with you to Dairy Queen, it does very little good to say, hot fudge sundae sounds pretty good about now, or I haven't had a blizzard in ages. Now, I'd be just confused by that superfluous information and go back to my cryptic crossword puzzle. No, I need to hear, let's go to Dairy Queen. Say it in plain words. That's the only way I'll know how to understand. Language is one of the great inventions. Words transmit information, requests, thoughts, and ideas from one person to another. It's a straightforward process. Say what you mean, use language to convey what you want me to know, and I'll understand. Hinting is an abuse of this miraculous privilege and undermines the whole enterprise. It's like being blessed with perfect pitch and then deliberately singing off key. So you'll understand my struggle throughout the years as I've suffered through the onslaught of verbal distortion everywhere I turn. And you'll understand the perplexity I fell into when I finally had to admit that I'd had it wrong all the time. No matter what language was created for in my innocent conception, the truth I've gradually come to realize is that it's very commonly, dare I say, primarily used not to clarify, but to disguise, to obscure, to conceal. What I used to rail against as a perversion, I now recognize as the norm, or if not the norm, at least a general practice that characterizes interpersonal interaction more accurately than my childish assumption of straightforwardness. Now, this revelation has been fostered by my frequent reading of the Odyssey, the book that I spent more time with than any other. It's a tale of the return of the Greek hero Odysseus to his home in Ithaca, which he left 20 years earlier to fight the Trojan War, leaving behind his infant son, Telemachus, and his wife, Penelope, who's now being wooed by 100 suitors. The Odyssey makes far better sense to me now that I've caught on to Homer's sly and playful use of language. And I now humbly realize that for years the author of the Odyssey must have been rolling his eyes in disgust at my banal literalness and unimaginative attitude toward language. In this poet's hands, language tends toward obfuscation rather than illumination. His characters do not, as a rule, say what they mean, and communication in this epic is something of a game at which some people are better players than others. Playing the game properly requires a keen ability to use words to convey meaning indirectly and sensitive awareness of what's been said despite what's been said. Though I'm getting better, I confess that I'm still something of an Odyssey reject. I'm the first speaker in this Henry James dialogue. Why is it so necessary for you to go to the theater tonight if Miss Ruth doesn't want you to? My dear child, she does. Why then did she say that she doesn't? Oh, because she meant just the contrary. Is she so false then? She speaks a special language. Practically it isn't false because it renders her thought, and those who know her understand it. Likewise, conversation in the Odyssey is a cryptic puzzle, intelligible and rewarding to those who know how to solve it, baffling to those who take it at face value. Homer's attitude toward language extends to a generally suspicious view of the way the world works. Dialogue in the Odyssey is founded on indirection, and the characters' success in life, even their survival, owes a great deal to both using and recognizing speech as a means of disguising thought and intent. This view of language as smoke and mirrors not only comments on the nature of human communication, but also supports a worldview at the heart of the Odyssey as a whole, one characterized by distrust and uncertainty. So I'd like to share with you a sampling of passages that illustrate how Homer characterizes the nature of human interaction in a way that has shaped my understanding of how the world really works. The Odyssey is riddled with hints, implications, subtexts, and coded dialogue that means something more than or different from what the words literally convey. It also goes beyond mere indirection. One of the Odyssey's more intriguing hallmarks is the prevalence of outright manipulation. It's one thing to speak in such a way that some can read the underlying meaning and some can't. It's quite another to create a false appearance and mislead others into mistaking it for reality. Fiddling with people's perceptions of reality is commonplace, and the Odyssey shows us a world in which success depends on the art of manipulation. Let's first take a look at indirection as the signature hallmark of the dialogue in the Odyssey. Odysseus is the champion of indirection, a master at tailoring language to suit his advantage. But he's not the only one. All the bright people in the Odyssey speak this way as a rule and know how to interpret it. All the foolish people think of language as I used to, as straightforward and honest. A delightfully unsophisticated example comes when Odysseus secretly lands on an island and spends the night by the river. Nausicaa, the nubile daughter of the island's king, whose help Odysseus badly needs, tells her father that she needs to do the laundry. She has her own marriage in her mind, planted there in a dream by Athena, the goddess of manipulation, but she's shy about saying so to dear old dad. So she asks him for a cart to take her to the river to wash clothes for the whole family so that her unmarried brothers can look good in public. It's proper for you yourself to plan plans with the chiefs wearing clean clothes on your skin, and you have 5 sons in your house, 2 married but 3 red-blooded bachelors. They always want to go to dances wearing freshly cleaned clothes. I have to think about all these things. Nausicaa thinks she's covered her purpose pretty well. She hasn't, but in keeping with the tenor of the conversation, her father isn't going to burst her bubble. He has no trouble decoding his daughter's appeal and grants it without betraying his understanding of her true intention. Thus she spoke, for she was ashamed to name her youthful marriage to her dear father. And he understood everything and replied, I don't begrudge you mules, child, nor anything else. Go, the servants will prepare a wagon for you. We've just heard a conversation in which the communication takes place beneath the surface of the words. Nausicaa's request conceals what she really wants to make herself suitable for suitors, and the king, a keen-eared father, accurately interprets what she means, keeps his awareness hidden, and replies with his assent in a way that leads her to believe that she's pulled one over on him. This indirect interchange is a paradigm of the distinct mode of communication in the Odyssey. Note that Athena, too, conceals her real desire. She doesn't care about Nausicaa's dirty clothes. She just wants the girl to be on hand by the river when Odysseus wakes up, and she brings that about without cluing Nausicaa in on her real purpose. No one speaks in a forthright manner. The words conceal intention and meaning. Contrast Nausicaa's instinct to speak in code, novice though he is, with the blatancy of Odysseus' son Telemachus, though some years her senior. Telemachus hasn't had the benefit of being raised up by his wily father, and his use of language shows it. Early on, Athena comes to him in disguise, ostensibly to encourage him to search for his father and find a way to solve the problem of his mother's 100 suitors. Since she could just tell him outright where Odysseus is and when he's coming back, this journey makes no sense if we take the disguised Athena at her word, as the gullible young fellow does. As usual, she disguises what she intends. She is actually suggesting this search in an effort to help Telemachus grow up, start to make a name for himself, and become more competent and to help his father later on. Just before going on the superfluous search but necessary journey of self-discovery, the boy foolishly tells the arrogant suitors exactly what he's doing and announces his intentions to get rid of them when he comes back, a fully blatant tirade, the exact opposite of the Odyssean norm. He hasn't yet realized that the proper Odyssean use of language is not to state both intention and truth clearly, but to confound the ears of the listeners. Concealment good, transparency bad. Telemachus does witness indirect language when he visits the precariously married couple, Menelaus and Helen, but it's unclear whether even he recognizes it as such. The Trojan War that took Odysseus from home 20 years ago began when Helen ran off with a pretty boy prince of Troy, and Menelaus gathered the Greek forces to go after her. The uneasy reconciliation of Menelaus and Helen finds expression in Telemachus' presence in a coded swapping of tales, apparently meant to give their young visitor a picture of his father in the Trojan War, but their discourse is actually directed toward each other. Helen, claiming to be repentant of her folly years before, tells of once rescuing the disguised Odysseus within the Trojan Wars, an anecdote really meant for her husband, who is to understand that she was working for the Greek cause all along from the inside and deserves to be trusted and forgiven now. Menelaus responds in kind with a tale of her treachery at the very end of the war when Helen walked around Odysseus' invention, the Trojan horse, mimicking the voices of the wives of the Greeks hidden inside in order to lure the warriors to reveal themselves. Telemachus simply hears two fine stories about his father. The married couple, however, who speak each other's language, are engaged in what must have been a very common meta-conversation. I'm really on your side. No, you aren't, you shameless liar. The grown-ups are talking below the boy's level of comprehension. But the boy will get better. By the time Odysseus is planning and carrying out his secret plan to take back his rightful place at home, Telemachus is well on his way toward mastering the art of coded conversation that the initiated won't understand. The plan works only because of the son's emulation of his father's skill in disguising language to conceal its true meaning. Nevertheless, he's still a beginner. A telling sign of immaturity comes in the long-delayed recognition scene between Odysseus and his wife Penelope, when the boy reverts to his youthful view of language and scolds his mother for not believing the simple truth that's been uttered clearly in plain Greek, that the man before her is her husband. Penelope shows herself to be one of the elite with this reply. If truly indeed this is Odysseus and he has come home, the two of us would certainly know each other best of all. For there are between us signs which we know, hidden from everyone else. Of course, the true addressee of this retort is not her son at all, but the man she's about to put to the test. Her son still has a lot to learn about the game of indirect communication. The second half of the Odyssey is constructed primarily on the scaffolding of concealment, misdirection, and coded messages. And Odysseus' lies and disguise as an old beggar are the most salient contributions to this atmosphere. At the beginning of the second half, Odysseus finally makes it to his homeland, but he still has a long way to go before he can enter the town safely, overcome the 100 suitors, and most importantly, re-win the heart of the wife he left behind 20 years ago. It would be out of keeping with the ethos of the Odyssey for Odysseus to make a direct approach to regain his position in Ithaca. In true Odyssean style, he makes a point of keeping his true identity secret from his eminently loyal wife and even from his true blue followers till the last possible moment. In his world, the straightforward must, on principle, be avoided. One of the great pleasures for me in reading the Odyssey comes in my own inability to, at crucial moments, to recognize whether I'm to take the words at face value or to read between the lines. This perverse joy rises when I'm not even sure when characters are reading between the lines. The first time Odysseus sees his wife after 20 years' separation can serve, at least in Odysseus's mind, as a model for successful indirect communication, such as we saw in sinister form with Helen and Menelaus. With a false pretext, as usual, Athena puts it into Penelope's mind to go downstairs to the main hall to show herself to her suitors. She tells the suitors of her husband's instructions upon his departure, which he's probably just made up just now, to marry someone else if he hasn't returned from the war by the time of their son's emergence into adulthood, virtually announcing her impending decision to choose from among them, hateful though this marriage would be. She follows up the message of enticement with a plea for a proper courtship with bountiful gifts. The suitors accept her words as both a true account of the past and a promise of her intention to marry soon. Losers in the Odyssey take what they hear at face value. Odysseus, on the other hand, receives with joy what any other husband would regard as an unwelcome announcement from the wife he sees and hears now for the first time in 20 years. Thus she spoke, and much suffering godlike Odysseus rejoiced, because she was wheedling gifts from them and was charming their hearts with soothing words, but her mind was intending other things. How does he know her mind was intending other things? We don't know whether Odysseus is correct that his wife has other intentions, or why he should be so confident it is her interpretation, or even what he assumes those other intentions to be. What we can tell is that in the spirit of their famous like-mindedness, the hero of indirect communication is imputing some of his own craft to his wife and assumes that her words mean something other than what they appear to mean. In his conception of his wife's apparently innocent command that the suitors bring her presents, she is, as it were, directing the actual message over the heads of the suitors toward the stranger in the back, who readily decodes her message as a clever subterfuge that works in his favor. Later that night, Odysseus is summoned to a private meeting with the queen. Private except for the maids standing by, some of them surely disloyal. This fireside interview is a treasure house of indirect communication, so cryptic that we really can't be sure which statements are meant to be taken at face value by us or by either of the characters, and which as encrypted messages. The entire conversation, which the possibly treacherous maids in the room can safely hear with a literal ear, gives us the distinct sense that the real communication is carried on well below the surface of the words, though even we can't be sure exactly what is meant and what is understood. Penelope politely receives the man who appears to be an old codger down on his luck and tells him about the con she'd been running on the suitors for 3 whole years, when she would weave a funeral shroud by day that she just had to be finished before her marriage, but would unweave at night in order to fend off that wedding, something really too intimate for a queen to tell a strange old man. Odysseus now gives her a false legend that thinly disguises his identity. He claims to have met Odysseus 20 years ago, and when she asks him what her husband was wearing, he goes into impressive detail about his garb, including a description of a hunting scene on a brooch, about as clear a way as any of saying who he really is. No one else could respond with such precision. She still insists that Odysseus is dead, and he counters with an assertion that he's alive and returning any minute now. She asks a trustworthy maid to wash the old man's feet, and all but says, "Wash your master's feet." She claims to have a detailed dream during the foot washing scene, though we have no reason to believe that she was even taking a nap. A dream about an eagle who kills her household geese. The eagle within the dream itself interprets the dream, saying he's Odysseus and the geese are the suitors. So Odysseus confirms this self-interpretation, but she coyly backs away from this hopeful solution. After all of the recent indications from a variety of sources that Odysseus is on the verge of returning home, she blithely and again too intimately announces her plans for an archery contest the very next day to determine which suitor she will marry. Seeing his chance to get a weapon into his hands, Odysseus encourages the plan and predicts that Odysseus will show up and win. What we all want to happen, and have every reason to expect, is that Penelope realizes who is speaking to her. She sees through all the false stories, broad hints, and wink-wink, nudge-nudge suggestiveness, and welcomes her husband in her arms. We also assume that Odysseus will likewise catch on to her tales and plans as confessions that she's been longing for him, and also almost explicit admissions that she knows exactly who he is. But the momentous, throbbing recognition doesn't take place. We'd like to know what Odysseus and Penelope each understand to be going on during this conversation, and to what extent they're on the same wavelength. But we have to resign ourselves to speculation and intuition. So even Homer himself practices indirect communication. Another author, Tolstoy, for example, who regularly interprets signs the reader might not catch and conveys his character's actual thoughts, would be happy to clarify the situation and leave us in no doubt that Penelope knew or did not know, that Odysseus knew she knew or did not know whether she knew, and so on. Homer, however, is not always interested in direct communication of his character's true knowledge or conjecture. Rather, he delights in giving us hints. We fully expect this conversation to be the recognition scene between husband and wife, and our anticipation continues to rise as Penelope gets closer and closer to the truth. But no, we all go to bed unsatisfied. The game of language in the Odyssey can be playful at times, but essentially the obfuscatory use of speech reflects a treacherous and precarious world in which survival and happiness depend on assuming that appearance is deceiving and that apparently transparent words are masking a reality that must be deciphered. Those who play the game well listen carefully to what is not stated outright and express what they mean by not saying what they mean. I'm embarrassed in looking back on my long life of misunderstanding people's words because I believed that their words conveyed what they truly meant. I so often failed in participating properly in the game of conversation. Instead, I'd straightforwardly transfer my thoughts to my mouth and say what I was thinking. What a simpleton. I must have been confusing people every day with my bizarre approach to interpersonal communication. How could anyone have possibly figured out what I meant when I said outright what I meant? When we meet Leopold Bloom in James Joyce's Ulysses, he's trying to explain something to his wife Molly in a clumsy fashion, and finally she just shouts out, "Oh, rocks, tell us in plain words." She's a woman after my own heart. But then it turns out that she's just received a letter from her lover and uses words shamelessly to cover up the truth when her husband inquires about it. So even Molly Bloom doesn't speak in plain words. Do I have no allies? I've spent most of my life refusing to enter into the proper spirit of human communication with my childish adherence to literal-mindedness. It's a wonder I've managed to develop any relationships at all. Now it's time to consider a more elaborate and more disturbing use of language to distort reality that I found to be pervasive in regular life, though we generally associate it with professionals in the seedy underworlds of con games, espionage, and politics. Odysseus, you should not be surprised to hear, is a skilled con man. When we move beyond indirect communication to a whole scenario fabricated to lead someone to believe that a false appearance is reality, we're in the realm of manipulation. Orchestrating a plot to fiddle with other people's perception of what is really happening generally has an insidious ring, yet I claim that it describes human interactions far more commonly than we'd like to admit. Let me describe the sort of fiddling I'm talking about and then look at how it operates in the Odyssey. I first fell in love with manipulation when I was 9 years old and faithfully watched the television series Mission Impossible. Unlike the Tom Cruise movies, the TV show had clever plots in which the agents succeeded by stealth against their enemies, not by force. The classic plot of a Mission Impossible episode follows the pattern of a con game. The leader of the Impossible Mission Force devises a scenario and selects the team of agents who perform the roles and handle the backstage maneuvers designed to create a false reality their marks will fall for. With forged credentials, convincing costumes and masks, and crucial knowledge that gives credence to their assumed identities, they enter the domain of the political enemies who are a threat to Western civilization and lure them into participating willingly in their own downfall. The mission depends on theater, a piece of fictional drama that all but the Impossible Mission Force's actors and stage crew mistake for reality. The victims therefore play their assigned roles on the assumption that they're going about the regular business of living. The television viewers watch a carefully constructed mingling of people in the know and people unaware that they're being led by the nose. In on the secret, the audience recognizes that the whole scenario is a scam and at the same time realizes that the scam will have a very real and very influential effect on the world's balance of power. The typical finale shows the light bulb going on in the principal adversary's head as the team makes its safe exit from the country, having wheedled the enemy out of a state secret, a political prisoner, a vital piece of technology, or some other treasure that is the last thing the mark wants to lose. Being robbed is one thing. Realizing you've actually abetted the culprits yourself is quite another. And a big part of the pleasure we get from the series comes from the schadenfreude of seeing bad people unwittingly ruining themselves. Manipulation combines false appearance with the illusion of freely chosen action. When we disguise reality and then use the facade to force moves on those who believe they're acting of their own volition, we mimic con artists in our own modest way. The exercise of manipulation rather than force has the advantage of enlisting cooperation that will last as long as the pretense stands firm. During an everyday version of a con, the ones who falsely believe they're exercising their free will and calling the shots will participate avidly. Successful advertisers and salespeople know how to make unwary customers think they're making their own purchasing decisions. Conniving students might get their gullible professors to think they're the ones that decide those students really ought to have an extension on their papers. Some professors might only be letting the contriving students think that that's what's happened. Parents regularly create false scenarios to con their children into behaving according to what the children mistakenly believe to be their own decisions. And children are quick to learn how to wheedle their parents' cooperation likewise in their own schemes. We'd like to think that our personal relationships are nothing but genuine and that intimate attachments are founded on the solid rock of truth. But we all know in our own social world that secrets and lies are a stock in trade, that we lie to our loved ones more than to anyone else, and that many cover-ups require something more involved than a lie, such as a false scenario that constructs a misleading outward show. Without a network of skilled accomplices, non-professionals can't rise to the level of con artists, spies, or Madison Avenue mavens in throwing a glitzy facade over a sordid reality. Still, regular people in everyday life often disguise reality with a false appearance that coaxes a coworker, personal adversary, spouse, or parent toward a decision or belief based on an illusion mistaken for reality. Where there's trust, there are con games. Manipulation is an elaborate version of what we've been talking about, using language to throw people off who aren't tuned into the real meaning beneath the literal words spoken. The uninitiated, the losers in this world, are taken in by appearance and have no idea that a play is being performed and that they themselves are part of the cast. Odysseus is a natural at directing and scripting the scenario, and it turns out he's not the only one in the Odyssey. Odysseus is a con man, but his principal goal isn't material gain, as in the case of professionals, but rather sheer survival and a happy reunion with his family. His wife, son, father, and ordinary small town are his be-all and end-all, the goal he spends now most of the epic doing all he can to attain. He exercises his talent for manipulation to win back the life he's left behind, and his dupes are those who stand in his way. Most of us, especially those of us beyond our youth, can follow his urgent desire to return home with sympathy. The pull toward a comfortable position in society can arguably be stronger for the average person than the allure of money, power, or revenge. In this sense, Odysseus represents ordinary humans. He's a grand epic hero with supernatural contacts and a colorful career, but in the Odyssey, he's one of us in his desire to keep his place in the family. At this juncture, he needs to exercise his talent for creating false realities in order to attain that goal. A look at Odysseus in terms of the con game illustrates in epic form what any of us might resort to in order to reach and maintain happiness in regular, everyday life. A summary of all the cons perpetrated in the Odyssey would cover nearly all the major and many minor events of the entire plot. We see indirectly influenced moves contrived even by characters other than our hero. We've already seen a couple of instances. We watch Athena, the goddess of indirection and manipulation, disguise herself as a sailor and gets Telemachus to take a series of steps in the belief that he's voluntarily doing one thing, searching for his father's whereabouts, whereas in fact she's simply preparing him for the adult role he must take to participate in his father's manipulative plot when he returns. He has no idea. It's on his own voyage that Telemachus gets to know about his father, the con man, when Menelaus tells the tale of Odysseus' famous piece of manipulation, the Trojan horse, an ingenious ploy that cons the Trojans into willingly bringing into their city the very warriors who will destroy them. We also hear more than once of Penelope's manipulation of her 100 suitors who constantly beleaguer her to make a marriage decision, yet fall for her weaving and unweaving charade for 3 years. And manipulation runs in the family. Odysseus' famous run-in with the Cyclops, a one-eyed monster, shows him pitted against an enemy he cannot overcome by force, so he cons him. He prepares for his con by telling the Cyclops that his name is Utis, which just means nobody. So after Odysseus and his men gouge out the monster's eye in his sleep, the victim howls in pain, which brings his neighbors to the rescue. But when they ask whether anyone is harming him, he says, as they understand it, nobody is killing me by trickery nor by force. Exactly what Odysseus intends the other giants to hear rather than what his victim thinks he's conveying to them. There's a man named Utis who is killing me, not by force, but by trickery. They're fooled and leave. Odysseus now cons the Cyclops into willingly releasing them by hiding his men under the monster's sheep he lets out of his cave out of his own volition. In the world of the Odyssey, deception and manipulation are the norm in human behavior. The characters, for the most part, avoid direct, straightforward communication, and they certainly don't make the mistake of giving others their trust. Theirs is a world in which people might easily not be who they seem and probably don't say what they mean. Concealment, lies, false identities, misleading appearances, and clandestine teamwork govern most of the plot in the second half of the Odyssey. The goal our hero is striving for in this series of cons is to arrive at a situation that most of us take for granted, a normal family life in his hometown, surrounded by people and places dear to him. The goal of his cons is regular life. It'll take a lot of ingenuity to get there. He needs to engage in indirect moves to make it work, even with the people closest to him. When Odysseus finally returns to the island of Ithaca, he instinctively plots his course around disguise, lies, and posturing designed to control the action while at the same time leading the uninitiated into thinking that they're making decisions of their own free will. The first person he comes across is a shepherd boy, and he tells him an elaborate false autobiography, a practice he'll repeat several times, even to people close to him. This time, the joke is on him because the shepherd boy is really Athena in disguise, pulling her own prank on her favorite just for the fun of it. Fun is a feature of manipulation that we mustn't forget. She cheerfully ribs Odysseus for the deceptive disposition she shares with him, and the two con artists devise a plan for dealing with the suitors as well as the family and servants. As in any con, they'll rely on improvisation as they work out the details of the sketched out plot as they go along. Odysseus is a stranger in his own land, and his goal is to divest his home of its exoticness and himself of his strangeness. An action hero would simply charge in and wipe out the enemy, whereas the hero of this story must foremost overcome the problem of displaced identities. His primary strategy, fittingly, is the adoption of a disguise and a false identity. Athena uses her magic to make Odysseus look older and more decrepit so as to arouse no alarm among the suitors and to fend off recognition by those who once knew him. A false appearance of the true situation is key. Athena sends the con man to his gullible old swineherd Eumaeus, and then gets Telemachus there too and insists that Odysseus reveal himself to his son. That move goes against his principle of keeping everyone else in the dark, but in Athena's impeccable judgment, he needs an inside man for the con to work. He's not going to let anyone else in on the plot, not even Penelope, until just before he shoots his first arrow. To Odysseus, the world of Ithaca is theater and will remain so until the threat has been fully overcome and his goal of regained status attained. Until that moment, the people he loves and cares about must remain fictional characters in the play he's constructing, not real people with whom he can share tenderness and emotion. He must see his son only as a participant in his machinations, and his wife, the primary cause of his returning home, only as a character whose aid for his cause he must obtain indirectly and without her awareness. Athena, Odysseus, and Telemachus work backstage to create a piece of theater in the front stage that everyone else will mistake for reality. They orchestrate a momentous alteration on Ithaca, a society run along what we like to think of as normal lines. Things are what they seem, will be transformed into the scene of an elaborate ruse. The innocence of regular life is adulterated by theater that isn't recognized as theater, in which appearances mask reality, and people operate under a mistaken impression of normality, while external forces are in fact steering actions and decisions along an invisible but inevitable course. Ithaca has been changed into a stage for Odysseus' performance, and the knowledge that everyone is now participating in a performance is doled out very sparingly by its director and star. The nominal marks in Odysseus' con game are the suitors who stand in the way of his reinstatement as family man in his home and as king of his small island. They must remain unaware of his identity and have no suspicion of the destruction he's planning behind the scenes. What they're allowed to see is all show, from his arrival on the scene in the guise of an old beggar to his pathetic move to string the bow that's defied their attempts. Telemachus plays his part now with great skill. He fools them into thinking he has nothing to do with the old man and behaves like the helpless youngster they've known for years. Backstage, preparations are made for the battle. The storeroom of weapons is locked. The appropriate doors have been shut to keep the combatants in and the townspeople out. A plausible and unsuspicious means to furnish Odysseus with a weapon has been worked out. The women have safely been enclosed in their chambers, and 3 men stand ready to join him in a battle that the suitors just don't see coming. The sting comes as a complete surprise to the victims because they perceived only what the team has wanted them to perceive. Caught completely off guard, the 100 suitors, with a little divine help, fall at the hands of one skilled warrior and 3 novice accomplices. The suitors fall for the con and pay the price of their faith and appearance with their lives. The game ends in a victory, and we like to think that all that remains is a celebration and the steps to return the site of the con to its normal state. But that's not reckoning with Odysseus' actual goal. We're far from done. The fallen enemies were formidable obstacles to the payoff, but their deaths are not the prize itself. This epic hero desires a life many of his former colleagues might regard as unheroic. He's had enough adventures in warfare. Now it's time to become once again a family man in charge of his backwoods homeland. The principal obstacle he must overcome then is not the angry young men out to kill him, but the rejection of the woman of the house. Penelope would have been a valuable ally in her husband's scheme, and as the hero's faithful wife yearning for his return, she seems a natural partner. She nevertheless plays an ambiguous role throughout in the eyes not only of her husband, who's been out of touch for 20 years, but also in the eyes of the audience, who sees more than Odysseus does, but still doesn't know exactly what's going on in her mind. Odysseus' strategy from the first is to avoid a direct approach to the woman so vital to his life. He prefers indirection and secrecy as a rule when tackling an operation, but it still seems odd that he doesn't make an exception in the case of his wife, the paragon of virtue. From his point of view, however, he has to consider all the possibilities of her state of mind and assume nothing, not only about what she might have done during his long absence, but more importantly, her feelings about him at the moment. So with disguise and dissembling, Odysseus reconnoiters the situation on the home front and does all he secretly can to reawaken his wife's eagerness to have him back in her life. He's intent on being cagey, and a peek into Penelope's mind will also prove more problematic than this master of manipulation is used to, as we saw in the interview scene between husband and wife that appears to go nowhere. Odysseus isn't ready to come clean, and apparently neither is she, so their conversation takes the form of implication, hints, and possibly code, exactly the indirection and subtlety Odysseus relishes. He finds his wife equal to the challenge, and he leaves uplifted, but, along with the rest of us, with no certainty as to what's just transpired. For all we know, she's running a con game on him. It's quite possible that she's actively cooperating with his plot while playing the innocent. If we take the text at face value and assume she's unaware of the beggar's identity, her aid arises either from subliminal recognition or by serendipity. If she knows she's speaking with her husband, she's secretly conspiring with him. If he knows that she knows, the interview is a long, coded conversation between fellow con artists, and the audience is among those being conned. The real success of Odysseus' scheme depends on the acceptance into the home by the woman abandoned long ago, whose sentiments the hero cannot govern or even know with certainty. When Penelope is told the joyful news and enters the scene after the battle, she does not fall into her husband's arms, as everyone expects, but holds him at a wary distance, as though doubtful that the long-desired return has actually been realized. The husband's goal is the renewal of the happy marriage disrupted 20 years ago by his departure. You can't expect to pick up where they left off, as though these eventful 20 years of separation have not changed them both. They both approach the reunion with caution and no assumptions. Odysseus has explicitly revealed his identity to 4 loyal people and then to all of the suitors, but not to his wife until now. If she knew or suspected who he was, she stayed quiet, and if anything, has only given him hints that she has reason to believe he'll catch. This dance around the truth, if that's what it is, probably did increase the chances of guarding the secrecy of the plot, now successful. More importantly, it's a necessary prelude to the mutual acceptance they both desire but can't take for granted. They need to work their way toward a remarriage in their own indirect fashion. Penelope chooses to bring the matter to a head by her own con. She claims, falsely or not, to doubt whether this man is indeed her husband. Unlike Telemachus, who chides his mother for her coldness, Odysseus recognizes the need to hold off the climax until they've reached an understanding. He accepts her reaction and tends to other tasks in the aftermath of the battle. His wife then, with feigned offhandedness, instructs her maid to move their marital bed elsewhere for the victorious stranger. Odysseus himself made this bed early in their marriage and fashioned one of its posts out of an olive tree planted firmly in the ground, an image of their marriage's stability. So he bristles in rage when she implies that it's no longer immobile. She's tampered with the symbol of their marriage. Perhaps another has joined her in the bed and cut the trunk. He rants and blusters at this outrage and thereby passes the test. She not only tells him, by using this falsity as her test, that she accepts him as her true husband. The olive tree still holds the bed to the earth. She also indirectly informs him that she's been true to him, since she couldn't have used this test if anyone else knew their secret. Her ploy ends the game. She's conned the con man. Secrecy and concealment govern the entire Odyssey, so the con game Odysseus pulls, perhaps with Penelope's participation, and the one she pulls on him seem like an appropriate way of going about a family reunion. Odysseus has turned the society of Ithaca and the household at the palace into a theatrical production with himself as director and creator of scenarios, with almost everyone else as actors unaware that a play is being produced. Only at the end can he let his guard down and return this theatrical world back to regular life. Secure in his status as husband, father, son, and peacetime king, Odysseus has earned his payoff and can lay aside the con game that won it for him. A sure sense of identity is a treasure we all desire. When that certainty is threatened by a significant change, a new home, school, or job, a different set of companions, a loss of important people, a failure, a considerable absence, it's worth pulling out all the stops to regain one's status. The obstacles can be daunting, insofar as a direct line of attack would fall short, as it likely would in trying to become accepted. A more subtle approach is called up for to establish oneself in a setting or to reestablish oneself into the good graces of people let down or left behind. Extreme though Odysseus' case is, his uncertainties that prompt him instinctively to dissemble, create false identities, and surreptitiously work his way back into his position on the home front after 20 years away are familiar to anyone in a new position in life. His success can come only with a full con game of epic proportions. Extended manipulation is not our typical response, but the cautious and the clever will engage in a certain amount of pretense and role-playing while assessing the situation and learning how best to enter or re-enter a community. As burglars need to case a house and neighborhood before the break-in, those on the outside who want to be welcomed in need to get a feel of the situation and play the part that seems most likely to win them acceptance. In the best scenarios, they'll eventually be themselves again and drop the act. Manipulation is the act of interfering in another person's life in a way that usurps that person's autonomy and surreptitiously calls the shots. Manipulation is theater, an infusion of theater into real life, in which at least one of the actors doesn't realize there's a play going on, but rather mistakes the play for real life. The dupes are manipulated into believing the false appearance to be reality and mistakenly assume they have control over their own actions and decisions. Manipulation comes in many shapes and sizes. Few of us will suffer from an elaborate scam, and even fewer will become con artists or secret agents. But I maintain that just as indirect communication is part of everyday life for all of us, we all experience and even practice manipulation in the course of our lives on a regular basis. The practice of controlling people without their awareness is very common and touches all of us. Rare, though elaborately staged productions might be in regular life, some form of manipulation actually characterizes much of our relations with other people, close acquaintances as well as strangers. It goes too far to say that manipulation is the norm in our everyday interactions. Still, we do encounter it in everyday situations frequently, and it's a rare person who has not practiced it in some fashion and felt justified in doing so. Creating false appearances comes easily to people in general, and it's a short step from there to using that faculty to mislead others into following one's own will. Far from the exclusive domain of experts with special training, manipulation is a game that everyone plays in one role or another. Indirection and manipulation are no anomalies in our daily lives. They're the unseen backbone of typical human interactions among not only adversaries, strangers, salespeople and customers, politicians and constituents, and advertisers and consumers, but also among friends and family. We can't really expect plain words or appearances that reflect reality. And I'm not even sure we could stand a world in which people always say what they mean and everything is as it seems. We're wired for convolution, role-playing, misdirection, disguise, and transformed realities. A constant barrage of straightforward language, truth, and transparency would seem unsporting and not quite human. So, I finally got the hint. Thank you.
So we should be around a campfire or something for a true conversation, but we have a microphone there, and I am perfectly happy to deliver this one to you. I'm hoping we have a little while for discussion, conversation, questions. So if you give me the high sign, I will get you this. Or you can use that one right over there, too.
And if you want to give your own personal, confessions of manipulation and indirection in your own lives, name names, that would be great.
There will be a prize for the best story, right? Yeah. Oh, come on.
Hey, Scott. So I'm asking a question. Is this working? It's okay? That has a coded message, which is very self-serving, because, yeah. So my question is, when Odysseus is in the court of Phaeacians, and he launches into his story in Book 9, and starts telling the whole backstory of how he left the Trojan War and the adventures with the Cyclops and all the good stuff, right? The really great, the island hopping. What do you make of the fact that that's all a story, right? That's all, that the way that Homer sets it up is that we're not just encountering him having those adventures, but we hear them through the words of Odysseus, who is speaking them to these people whom he hopes will take him home. And I just wondered what you made of that. Do you think he's manipulating them? Do you think that we're supposed to sort of wonder about his motivations and the story he's telling?
Jessica's asking sort of question that I ask in class on a regular basis. Excellent question, therefore.
No manipulation there.
About halfway through the Odyssey, we pause in the narration, and Odysseus himself tells the tale of what's transpired between the time he left the Trojan War and the time he got to his place now. So it's a period of 10 years. 7 of those years have been idle, but 3 of those years are jam-packed. And he tells tales of seeing the Cyclops as one, the sirens, the locust eaters. There's a witch. There are monsters. There are temptations. There are obstacles. Lots of things are going on, and he is telling the story, not the external narrator. So Jessica's asking about what that what are the implications of that? What would that mean? Now, the people he's talking to are the people that he's depending on for a ride home. He's gotten to this one island, and they have magic ships that can get to his home just overnight. And in fact, that is what happens. But he has to be cagey. He's not so sure that they're going to do it just because he comes in and says, "Hi, I'm Odysseus, take me home." He has to kind of feel his way around, and then eventually they keep asking, "Who are you? Who are you?" And then he finally says, "Okay, I'll come clean. My name is Odysseus." And once he starts talking, he never stops. It goes on for about a sixth of the entire epic is him talking about who he is and what he's doing. Now, I think the implication of Jessica's question, what she's hinting at, is that perhaps this itself is part of Odysseus's manipulation. And I think we can see evidence all the way through that he's trying his best to make himself look like the sort of person that they would want to help. He comes across as loyal to his foolish comrades who keep blowing it right and left. He even works in like a little bit of a lot of goof ups, not only by the men, but also by himself. He goofs up at the end of the Cyclops scene to say, "See, I had a lot to learn. I'm not perfect. I'm just sort of some guy who's worked my way up." And by the end, he has apparently successfully charmed them into thinking, this is a guy we really need to help. There even comes a point when he does the same thing that Penelope does later on. He kind of says, "Okay, I think I'm tired of talking now." And they go, no, please. "Well, I don't know. It's kind of late. Look at the time." And then the queen says, "Hey, let's everybody bring him some presents." So they all bring him a whole bunch of presents. And he goes, "Oh, yeah, okay, I'll continue on." And he goes on for another book and a half. Telling what's going on. He includes tales such as his visit to the underworld. Did he really go to the underworld? Really, can you do that? And he talks to his mother's ghosts, and he talks to all the heroes from the past, and he sees a whole bunch of mythical women who are really good, a lot like the queen right over here. Looking at, so he has a lot of little small tales and big tales which demonstrate, I'm a guy that you really should be helping out. So I think the wisdom is, I think that we have to take those tales with a grain of salt. Not that they didn't all happen. There's evidence from elsewhere in the Iliad that he actually did see the Cyclops, that she actually did visit Circe. So he's doing the tales his own way to kind of nudge them into supporting him. So yeah, I think narrative. Especially self-narrative, is a way of manipulation. Later on, he just gives outright lies, but there are a lot of people who think, no, these are just outright lies themselves. But we never know. We're not told. We just have to kind of think, well, here's a guy who lies all the time. He's telling about himself, and he's really coming off as a epic hero. That's right. So just think about that on your third date. How to manipulate that. So yeah, a very nice question then, Jessica. And Tom.
Hi, Scott. Thank you. This was fun. When you started out, I thought, oh, well, you should have taken up mathematics if you wanted to have straightforward answers. But I'm suspicious about whether you're going to tell me that, well, when you read mathematics, actually it's a con job. So I want to hear your view about whether math is a con job.
I thought math, don't say that, Tom. I thought math is like the one thing you can count on. For goodness sakes. Yeah, exactly, literally. So I would never accuse you or your cohorts of trying to con anybody except into making it look as though this ought to be a college requirement. That would be the thing. Yeah. So I'm not sure, I could put this back to you or anybody else in the audience, whether math, which looks like it's just sort of pulling the truth out from the air and presenting it to us very clearly, if there's something con about that. The only thing I can think of is all this Lobachevsky stuff and imaginary numbers. I mean, that's surely you just made that up to confuse the sophomores. But anyway, so do other people think that there's something even in the truth of mathematics that could be a con? Oh my goodness. Nobody does? All right, well, there we go. So you live in a pure world.
Scott, I don't think I'm ever going to look at you the same way again after this talk. I'm going to have to lock my door next to yours, and I don't even know why we're having a Q&A session, because everything you're saying just seems like it's a lie at this point. I don't know what to believe and what not to. I'm thinking of the end and the means. I've always, thought it's not just the end that matters, but the means is an important thing, how we go about doing things. At least that's what I tell my kids. But maybe I'm just lying to them. But I'm wondering, should we come away from this with certainly a new appreciation, but also, would you say we should come away with this with a new, happy embrace of the means over the end and manipulation? And how would you, what do you think about that, end and means, and how that sort of plays out in everyday life, based on what you've learned from literature and what you yourself have kind of mulled over?
I'm not supporting this manipulation business. I'm just saying this is how it is, and I personally am definitely not a means justify the ends kind of a person at all. But manipulation is a version of that. But what I can say is that not all manipulation is necessarily bad or self-serving. When it is self-serving, as it is for the people that call you on the phone to tell you they're the IRS and you need to give them $2,500 worth of Walmart gift cards, that's a means towards a despicable end. But if you are arranging a surprise party and you manipulate the victim in such a way as the person ends up at the party and, oh my goodness, here it's a big surprise, and isn't that wonderful? Now, I personally hate surprises. Don't ever do a surprise party for me. Thank you for advertising the party you're having for me in 3 weeks, because then I'll know what to do and I'll know to shave that day. But I think that, yes, this manipulation is a means to an end that is not straightforward, and I love watching it in fiction, and I kind of like watching it in real life if I'm not the one affected. But I do see something kind of, by nature, kind of insidious in tone about the whole thing of leading people on. And I've seen people doing, even with their kids, saying things to their kids that will get the job done for right now. But the kids kind of pick up on the fact that, oh my goodness, I've just been had. Now how am I going to trust my parents again? So I think there's something that destroys trust in this whole manipulation thing, that even if it has an end that you think is going to be good, that you're going to get somebody to an intervention to cure talked about the person's gambling addiction or something, and you have to use subterfuge to get there, but you finally get there and it's all for the person's good. It's still, okay, yes, the person might not go to the casino much anymore, but that person's never going to trust you again. So there is something, I think, inherently creepy about the whole manipulation thing, even though we all do it a lot, and we think that, oh yes, for this time it's justified. I'm not doing this for my own good. I'm doing this for yours. So anyway, yeah, as I said, I'm a straightforward kind of guy. I want to say what I mean, and if you don't understand what I mean, it's not my fault. And so to do this other underhanded way of doing it, I think I've come to do it sometimes, especially in class. But I'm not proud of myself for it. So anyway, yes, in answer, I think, yes, you brought up this whole manipulation means to an end is is very fine. This is something I pose in like ethics seminars periodically, and even in my mythology class, we have, in various other classes, I have them read a play called Philoctetes, in which we have a goal that needs to be taken care of. We need to get Philoctetes from his island, but he's not going to go if you just go directly to him and say, hey, Philoctetes, you need to come fight the Trojan War because then we'll win. He's not going to go because he hates their guts. So so Odysseus, who is a bad guy in all of the Greek plays he's in. He's always a really bad guy. He cons a young guy whom nobody knows, who's just an Eagle Scout. Hello, I cannot tell a lie. And says, okay, here's how we're going to do it. You're going to pretend that you're fed up with the Greeks, especially with me, and you're going to get on a boat, and we're going to go back home because you've been stranded here for 10 years. The lousy Greeks left you here just because you have a snake bite and it smells. You just had to be there for 10 years. So we'll get on a boat, and then it go away, and then all of a sudden, it's actually the boat takes it to Troy, and then you help us win the Trojan War. And this kid, he doesn't like it. He kind of goes through with it because it's Odysseus telling him, and it's like, a mentor telling an undergraduate what to do, and undergraduates always do that thing. But wait a minute, this isn't right. So then he just about gets Philoctetes on the boat, and then he fesses up and says, sorry, pal, I just lied to you this whole thing, and I just don't feel good about it. So the dilemma there is, okay, in order to get Philoctetes on the boat, you have to do this subterfuge, but to somebody like Neoptolemus, who I sort of see as my role model, you shouldn't really be. You shouldn't be lying to somebody, especially somebody with a bad, smelly leg who you've left behind for 10 years and mistreated all this time. So, yeah, okay, so there.
I actually have a follow-up for Jason's question, and you know Odysseus better than I do, but the scene where Athena comes down and, she just loves this guy because, God, you're such a liar. And then he still won't come out of character, and it's a kind of, oh, I love you even more.
That's right.
And so, here's my
guy.
question that, here's Jason asking about using manipulation and indirection for a noble end. I always have the sense that, well, like any other skill, Odysseus is really good at this. And the thing about being really good at something is that sometimes it's just pleasurable just to exercise that skill. So I'm curious, do I have Odysseus wrong?
Oh, no, you got that. You got that right. A case in point, a very good case in point. The battle with the suitors is all over, okay? So they're all done. You got 100 of them down, and it's just a matter of cleaning up. We do have the townspeople to deal with, because some of them are relatives, and so that's sort of perfunctory. But he goes out, and he goes to find his father. This is at the very end. His father has abdicated the throne long ago, long before Odysseus left, and he's sort of living out in the woods and kind of leading a rustic life. And so Odysseus says, I got to go find Dad. I've got the son, I've got the wife. Now what's left is the dad, and that will reconfirm my reinstatement back into my homeland. You can't really do that without seeing the one living parent. So he goes to the dad, and the dad says, hey, who are you? And Odysseus says, my name's Bob. I just showed up here. And, okay, what? Do you know anything about my son? I kind of heard something about him. Yeah, he's away. I don't know. And then the dad is kind of like heartbroken. He's just practically ready to keel over. Then he says, no, wait a minute. I'm just joking. I am really Odysseus. And Laertes, of course, says, no, you're not. And Odysseus says, yeah, I'll tell you, because look at the orchard that we just planted. I'll tell you just when we did that together. Here we planted it, and we did this, and then that was proof. The connection between father and son over the land that is theirs, that is what connects them. And then Laertes says, son, you're home. So what's this? Everybody wonders, why in the world does he do this? All he has to do is say, Dad, it's me. And no, he doesn't. He does exactly what Tony says. He just says, this is kind of my, and I'm not sure it's even for fun. In my mind, it gets so ingrained that the thing that you do is lie, deceive, manipulate. You fend off identification as long as possible so that it's basically a knee-jerk reaction. And I think that's kind of what's going on here. And to me, part of the problem, and this does go towards Jason's worry about things, is that one of the byproducts, and not a very good byproduct, of the entire of this entire way of life and going about things is that you threaten, with your means of survival, you threaten the purpose of your survival. So what he wants is to be at one with the family, but to do that, he has to pretend that he's somebody else. And you can't have it both ways. So he's going to have to come to a point where he says, I'm just going to stop this. I'm just going to stop. But he hasn't yet. By the end of the Odyssey, he just can't do it. So what we hope is ultimately his actual return to his real self will come later, and it will come with sort of a detox program of not doing this anymore, so that eventually his purpose of living is addressed and his manner of surviving up to this point has served its function.
Well, Scott will stick around for a little while. I'm sure some of you have to run, so Scott's going to stick around for a little while. We can chat. And please join me in thanking Scott.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. It's just an honor to have you all with me here today.